Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. Just doing a video on the press conference that Ange Postecoglou did with us earlier this afternoon. You'll see this on Saturday morning actually. I didn't quite get time to do one on the open section, so I thought I'd do one to go out in the morning on the whole press conference, including the embargo section. Probably makes more sense. I didn't think there was a lot of lines from the open section anyway. It wasn't like it was a very news heavy press conference, but his probably more interesting stuff, his more sort of Angisms came in the embargo section anyway, so it's probably quite nice to go with that. I mean, I'll briefly talk about the open section first, what news lines there were. I mean, Sonny is not fit for the Liverpool game. He is still out with a foot problem, and on Friday it was the first time apparently that he was out on the grass with the players. So it's a day-by-day decision as to whether he will be fit for Thursday's crunch first leg semi-final in the Europa League against Bodo Glimt. He was asked about Cristian Romero as well. Obviously, Romero's made news this week with the interview he did with the Argentine reporter Gaston Adul, where he talked about wanting to play in La Liga and how at the end of the season he'll be open to anything, which felt a little bit, let's be honest, like dropping a big hint, to say the least, about wanting to leave effectively the club in the summer. Just a couple of things to add on that, because I did a video on what my thoughts are on Romero with 2 years left, and personally how I feel if they can get an offer of 60 million, which there's no guarantee that will happen, but if that's the money they want, then I feel personally he's not good enough to hold against his will effectively, and it's probably the right time to move on, even though he's an excellent player and one of their best players, to be fair. And if you haven't seen that, check that out already. But just a word on Romero interview. Apparently Gaston was doing interviews across Europe. It was one of one, so it wasn't just one with Romero. He's doing one with lots of Argentine players. Apparently he did one with Alexis McAllister, Enzo Fernandez, both obviously in England with Liverpool and Chelsea, and I think he's going up to Roma to do Dybala. So I don't know, the sort of suggestion that I was kind of almost inferring myself that it was all kind of a bit put together on purpose. Maybe that's not quite fair, although I still imagine Romero had a lot of, if not saying how it was all going to be presented, then I guess I wouldn't be surprised if he knew what was coming questions-wise. But anyway, Andrew was asked about Romero, and he said, look, it's the same with me. If you get a question, you have to answer it. He said he didn't quite see all the reports on it. But he said what matters isn't about Cristian Romero's future or anyone else's future for that matter. Obviously his own, kind of referencing that. What matters is the opportunity that they've got in front of them, i.e. the Europa League, and the chance to end this somewhat disastrous season, at least in the Premier League, with glory in the Europa League. So sort of sticking to that narrative. In the open section, he was also asked about Richarlison. Obviously, he's been injured for most of the season, but when he has played, he has looked lively. He has been a goal threat. Scored 4 goals now, I think, this season, which is obviously not a massive total, but given his injuries, it's not bad, to be honest. And it's funny, Andrew was talking about him and saying he's a bit different to Solanke, and he's actually more of an 18-yard box striker, more of a fox in the box, which I don't know if Everton fans would have described him in that way when he was at Everton, often playing off the left wing. But Ange is right. When you watch him play, he does look a lot of goal threat. He seems to be very good in the air. Chances seem to happen when he plays, even if he misses them. So, it'd be interesting to see if he gets some game time at Liverpool. And on Liverpool, he was asked. Obviously, everyone knows by now that Ange grew up a boyhood Liverpool fan. He's spoken at length about his love of that Liverpool team back in the 70s. And he was asked whether, obviously, Spurs have the chance going into this game on Sunday to deny his boyhood club the title if they ever pull off what would be, let's be honest, a shock win at this point. And he's funny line, very Ange line, saying, I'm 60 years or nearly 60 years old. I've sort of moved past my boyhood crushes at this point, so it will have no impact on the game whatsoever, which was a funny line on Liverpool. And then just finally on the open section, before I move to some of the lines on the embargo bit, he was sort of asked about his sort of pride, because he's a proud guy, Ange, and how much that's effectively been hit by 18 league defeats, the prospect of if they reach 20, it'll be a record. The Spurs' worst season really in the Premier League, at least from a defeats perspective, which can't be easy to swallow when you're the guy in charge of it all. And his response to that, to my colleague George Sessions, was quite in keeping, I would say, in the narrative, the way he's been talking pretty much ever since the last international break. He said that it's not about me, we've fallen well short, but we can assess all of it at the end of the year in terms of the totality of my 2 years here. Now, said in isolation, you might think, it's just it's just a sentence. But when you add it sort of cumulatively to some of the comments he's made, such as there being some excellent candidates if he were to move on, how, he's seen how people have written him as if he's gone already, even if they win the Europa League. What else has he said? He said that he talks about the ownership and how maybe not just someone inside the club, but externally they could do with more people speaking up, just not rather than just him. Just a lot of comments on his front which have hinted of someone who may know that they're not staying. Now, it's a big statement, that, and I know there's been stories obviously this week of even if he wins the Europa League, he could go anyway. And I obviously asked him, you might remember, ahead of the Frankfurt game, whether he knew his fate, whatever was going to happen. I mean, let's be honest, I don't think he was probably going to answer that truthfully, even if he did, because that would be probably encouraging more conjecture over what was going to happen to him or not. But I don't know. I wonder if what happens to it, if he does get the sack, if it doesn't work out this season, or he walks away mutually, or whatever it is. I wonder if we look back now at this sort of period post the international break, really, where some of the language in the way he spoke was a bit different to before, and sort of hinted, I guess, at a man who kind of knew what was going to happen to him. And if you think that way, I would say that line about, the totality of my 2 years in charge, you could read it in that way, but maybe I'm overthinking it. I'm not sure. Anyway, a little bit about the embargo section just before I move on to the game itself. Another Premier League game, which feels like it doesn't mean a whole lot, to be honest, despite the sort of glamour tie that is Liverpool. And as ever with Ange, which always kind of slightly baffles me because the cameras are still on, hence why you'll see the clips. Maybe you'll see the clip of the one bit exchange that I had with him today, or maybe it'll be another bit. But he often does feel a bit, more relaxed with the embargo section. He changes his mood a little bit. I don't know what it is. But anyway, the best line, definitely, and probably the way I'm going to sort of tag up this video, I suppose. He's talking about this saying, basically, brought up this saying that apparently he's been using with the players. It's called the Stone Cutters Creed. Apparently it's not an Aussie thing. We actually had an Australian journalist in the press conference today who was sort of asking, is this an Australian thing? And he said no. And so, I personally got what he was saying straight away, but I haven't heard this creed. It makes a lot of sense. The point is, with the Stonecutters Creed, as the stonemasons, the sort of what they swear their lives by, apparently, is on the 101st sort of strike of the rock. That's the one that cracks it. But the first 100, to get to that point, don't break it, and it looks like nothing's really happening. Point being is, if you keep doing the same thing and you're doing all this stuff that people, from the outside doesn't look like it's having an effect. If anything, people might start questioning whether it's wrong. Eventually, it will get to the point where it breaks the rock. The rock being, a trophy, getting to success. And he's apparently been using this sort of phrase with the players. It's a way, I suppose, of continuing to motivate them during these difficult times, where he's obviously been instilling what he believes is the right way to play football, the right approach. And in that whole belief, when you're trying to impart it onto a group of Premier League players, which must be quite difficult in itself, becomes all the more difficult when it seemingly isn't working a lot of the time, when you keep having all these losses. But, you obviously see the Europa League run. I guess you can use that as evidence of sort of, keep the faith and stick with the plan. But yeah, it's this phrase, Stonecutter's Creed, is the thing that he's been sort of apparently using with the players to sort of remind them that if you stick with it effectively, you can eventually get it to work, really. Unsurprisingly, working for the Sun, I had quite a lot of fun with that, with some punny intros about him being in a rock and a hard place at the moment, but how it can all, he still crack success at Spurs. But it was classic Ange, really. Classic Ange of the way he just comes up with these phrases that no other football manager really does. Not very often, not many. I mean, there are others. Jose Mourinho was good at this kind of stuff, but there aren't many. And it's probably why people like myself really enjoy him when he's like this. Obviously, as I've said many times to Tottenham fans, it's nice to have someone you can kind of identify with as the manager and sort of find interesting, but it really isn't. It's way down on the list of priorities compared to winning games and playing good football. So it's definitely not going to save him, but it made for an interesting press conference. What else did he say? I asked him actually specifically about kind of how there seems to be this element of him feeling like, or giving the impression that he believes it's him against the world, pretty much, or it's his team against the world, and how everyone seems to be down on him. And I just don't see it. I see some of it, but I see most of that just basically being dependent on the fact that they keep losing games. And that's just how it goes for any big team, that when you can't win games, you get criticised. And that's really, whatever he says, ultimately what I think it comes down to. He sees it a bit differently. He says that he makes a big point about 5th place last year and how everyone saw it as a bit of a disaster. And now you look, and he made the point, maybe fairly, about how now the race for 5th place, all these teams are getting sort of lauded for being in there, which I'm not sure they are. I think it's mainly Nottingham Forest who are, maybe Newcastle, given where they've come from. Now, I first of all, I don't really agree on that sort of depiction of how it went last season. I think had they started this at the start of the season, a lot of Tottenham fans, having lost Harry Kane and got a new manager in, would have taken 5th place. The point was they had 4th place in their grasp, and they let it slip through their fingers by a poor end to the season, and that's why 5th felt disappointing. It's all about the context. It's not that 5th from the outset would have been deemed as a disappointment. And also the way Ange was talking last season about how didn't it matter to get into the Champions League. And I mean, he can argue all he likes about how we kind of got the wrong end of the stick of what he was trying to say. But for someone who so generally speaks with such clarity, there were quite muddy waters with the way he was trying to explain things, and people were left a bit confused by it and what he really thought was important. But anyway, maybe you'll disagree with me on that point. But anyway, on when he kind of brought this up, or I did, and he sort of did, I brought up the comment that he said about at the end of the Frankfurt press conference, this little aside, which I thought at the time, I was in the mix zone, but I heard about this and I obviously watched it later. I did feel like it was directed towards the media rather than fans, but there had been some people questioning whether it was kind of directed towards supporters. This line about, unfortunately for some of you, I'll be hanging around a bit longer. And I kind of put that to him. I didn't put it to him like, was that about the fans? But I was kind of talking it through. And he sort of bit back on that to a certain extent. He said, obviously it wasn't about the fans. It was ironic, my Aussie sense of humour. So to confirm, it definitely wasn't about the supporters, that line. And he does say, look, there are fans who are right behind me. And I just, on that note, I'll reference a column that Martin Samuel, who's, if you don't know, is like one of the biggest hitting sort of journalists in British football journalism, who's worked for all the papers. He's now a columnist for the Times. He did this column the other day, which you may well have seen, where he talked about how he was ahead of the Forest game and how Ange has got it wrong in the sense that everyone, if he genuinely believes that everyone's sort of against him, it's actually the complete opposite generally, apart from going into that Forest game because the neutral would love Forest to do well. But generally, they're all for him being a bit of a dreamer, a bit of a different, taking a different tack, the way he talks, the way his teams generally don't play in such a robotic style compared to everyone else, the way his principles, all that kind of stuff. And that's the way I see it as well, to be fair. If anything, he's had a easier ride given the results he's had in the league than others might. So that was kind of what I was saying. And he did say, look, there are fans that he meets, literally bumps into, who are right behind him, as disappointed as they are, or very supportive, as disappointed as they are with the season itself. But he still sort of persists where he thinks that there's this sort of narrative of what, how did he put it? He said, people trying to sort of set the club up for a fall. I don't know if I agree. Again, I think it comes down to results. I really do think, I mean, you're always going to get people who don't like your club. And Tottenham, unfortunately for them, have, 3 clubs in Arsenal, obviously, Chelsea as well, and West Ham, who have that rivalry in London. But I honestly don't think outside of that, and also that rivalry often brings, the most intrigue. So it's not a bad thing to have rivals and have that passion. But I don't think people have got it in for Tottenham, like he's suggesting. Maybe I'm wrong, and he's not the first person to sort of suggest it. So maybe it's different when you're in that environment. But honestly, I don't see that. I see it mainly people who are criticising the club and the team because of the way they're performing and the results they're getting. Nothing more than that. But anyway, he says but on that note, he did say, he is trying to do things differently, and he did admit that some things have gone wrong this season, some have gone disastrously wrong. He then sort of was asked about that by my colleague Dan Kilpatrick later on from the Evening Standard about what he felt like had gone disastrously wrong, and mainly he spoke about the injuries they'd had and how catastrophic the effect that it had on the season. And in that, another answer to Dan, he was asked whether there was this famous quote from Postecoglou from Pochettino about Spurs needing a painful rebuild, which you might well remember, and whether that's what the Spurs are going through right now. And Ange said, yeah, that's pretty obvious. That's what we're doing when you look at the sort of recruitment that they went for, the younger players they went for, which he once again said that was the right strategy, but obviously they lost experience through it. And then obviously had these unprecedented injury crisis. So that was pretty much it from the embargo section. But if you're interested, I would go seek it out. There's some nice exchanges with a couple of us, which sort of speak to what Ange can be like when he's at his best, I would say. So finally, let's talk about Liverpool. As I said, another Premier League game, which feels like it's just like, just get them down, get them done to the end of the season. And let's be honest, I think everyone, if it isn't a 19th league defeat of the season, I think most people will be quite surprised, given that Liverpool only need a point to win the title. Maybe there'll be a few nerves, perhaps, and they're not playing as well as they did, Liverpool. But the way Spurs are playing in the league in between these European fixtures gives really no confidence whatsoever that they can get a result here. And actually, in one of the answers to me, ends up basically saying it's all about effectively saying the focus is all on third. Let me paraphrase, the importance is all on Thursday, and they're basically using this game to try and get into a right position to be ready for that game, which I'll come on to with my sort of likely lineup, and that might be reflected a bit in that. But I feel like these Liverpool games, when you go through Ange's tenure, they're almost like reflective of how it's been, how it's gone the whole time. You had the absolute elation, the absolute high of that 2-1 win at home in that halcyon 10-game period at the start of his tenure when Joel Matip scored an own goal in the 95th minute. Liverpool down to 9 men, almost held on, but Spurs won it in a part of their sort of run to the start, to the top of the table at the start. And you really felt like then, anything was possible for Spurs and this club, and under Postecoglou. And then later on that season, I think they lost 4-2 at Anfield during this run of 4 defeats, which basically did for them finishing in the top 4 towards the end of the season. Then this year, you got the mad 6-3 at home, where they were 5-1 down at one point, when Liverpool just absolutely ripped them apart. And they just looked really, really out of their depth. And maybe Ange did it as well at that point. Then you had the League Cup semi-final first leg, where they bounced back after 17 days after that 6-3 and won 1-0 at home. Slight controversial winner perhaps with Bergvall, but probably deserved over across the game, and they were really, really good. Spence had Salah in his pocket, and you thought, right, he could be back into it. But then they go to Anfield, everyone's always fearing the worst, but it was a terrible performance. They got battered 4-0. Just, it could have been worse. And you really thought, wow, that was on one of their biggest games under Ange of the season. At that point, the league season was going terribly. It was just awful. So you've had all those moments, and who knows what we're going to see at Anfield on Sunday. I mean, you'd think probably more likely they conceded 4 last time on both occasions under Ange. Last time they've been to Anfield, their focus is clearly on the Europa League. You would be fearing the same thing. They conceded 4 last time they were out at Wolves, lost at home to Forest last time out. It's hard to make a case for Spurs going to Anfield in any way. If they come away without a defeat, it would be a surprise, maybe even a shock, and very, very gratefully received the way it's going. So on team selection, to round this off, obviously it's all about, like I say, the Europa League, that first game against Bodo, Vicario in goal, maybe Spence at right back, or even Archie Gray. I think maybe Danzo, centre back, maybe Davis with him. Probably a chance to rest Romero and Van der Ven, having played against Forest. Just get them ready for the massive game against Bodo. Doggy at left back probably. Midfield of, I'm thinking maybe Bergvall, Sarr, and Maddison. I just don't think Basuma comes into it. Just feels like he's done, to be honest. Under Ange really, or as a starter. Probably not Bentancur, so probably those 3. And then it's tough with up front. Probably Johnson out wide, right? And then I think Solanke, because he didn't start the other day. And then I'm thinking maybe starting Richarlison on the left. I know he only just started against Forest, but the gap is 6 days. He looked lively throughout the game. That left side, particularly if Son doesn't make it for that first game, and to be honest, there's an argument to be had that the way he's been playing, he shouldn't have that left side nailed down anyway for the first Bodo game. I think Tell's been playing well recently, so there's definitely a case to keep him in it. But Richarlison it has been a threat, and you can play him wide left. So I wonder if you might even start with that and see how he goes. Obviously, Odobert has a chance of coming in as well, so he's got options. But look, I mean, like I say, the main thing is not to come through unscathed. I think that was even a question that was put to him in the broadcast, that as much as they want to be competitive and maybe deny Ange's boyhood team the title, is the main thing, just coming through unscathed ahead of the Europa League game. And whilst Ange obviously pushed back on that, he could never say that publicly, I personally think that is the main aim at this point ahead of the Europa League. So let's see how it goes. I'll do a review after the match and speak to you then. Cheers, guys.